Are going live though, right?
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening,
Good to
Ken.
see everyone.
Hello, Ken.
It's good to see everyone.
Good afternoon.
Welcome everybody to episode 462 of Line Upon Line. Could Christ return or a rapture happen tonight? And tonight we have Tom and Stan and Dr. Ricks as always. Dr. Ricks, if you would start us out, that would be wonderful.
Okay, today we're going to have ultra groaners. Ultra
my.
groaners. This first one is called pie. In Jamaica, pie that's apple pie is $1.75. St. Kitts cherry pie is $2.50. Trinidad cream pie is $1.90. Tobago kidney pie is $2. These are the pie rates of the Caribbean. Think about that. The pie rates of the Caribbean.
I apologize to everybody right now.
That's a real groan. Now you talk about groaners. Here's one of my all-time favorites. This is called the would-be cowboy. This guy goes to the pearly gates and says, St. Peter's, I want in. And St. Peter says, I'm looking at your record, cowboy, and you've done nothing unselfish. You've been selfish all your life. Why do you think you deserve to get in the pearly gates? He says, well, St. Peter's, I did something very unselfish. I saw this little old lady being pounced on by a street gang, and they were robbing and beating her. And I walked up to the leader of the gang. I said, you better leave this woman alone. And I grabbed his nose ring and I yanked it hard. St. Peter's looks at the record and says, well, I don't see it in your record. When did that happen? About 20 seconds ago.
Oh, man.
I know that was not original, but isn't that a joke that really grabbed you? Okay, these are some quick groaners. What do you call a cow in a tornado? A milkshake. What does a mother ghost say to her baby ghost who's eating dessert too fast? Stop. You're goblin. Why did the baby blueberry start to cry? So why are you crying, baby blueberry? He said, because my parents are in a jam.
Just when you think it can't get any worse.
Now, that's a super groaner, isn't it? I assume you all did not like the one about the goblin, not goblin, goblin. You almost have to see it written out, then it makes more sense, the goblin. Okay. Well, could Christ return or rapture happen tonight? And what we believe is that, are there any events that have to prophetically precede Jesus Christ's return? Because if someone said, well, at midnight, Christ could come back. Is that true or isn't it? And there are a lot of Americans, probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions, that believe Jesus could maybe, if he wanted to, come back tonight.
It's interesting we've got this because I got relatives that think this exact thing. And they'll never see this, however, but they think this exact thing, that Christ could return at any moment. And there's a big risk by believing in this doctrine. There's a huge risk to everyone who does believe.
Well, when you think about, I mean, I was sort of talking before the show here that I didn't realize that there's a vast majority of Christianity that doesn't accept this doctrine, but there is, at least in the people that I've come in contact with who are religious, nominal Christians, they believe in the rapture and they think that it's going to happen, and it's really taken roots here in the United States. And it's believed by a lot of people, even though, we know the word rapture is not in the Bible. But I find it fascinating that they ignore all of the scriptures that talk about the opposite of the rapture, and that is, maybe we can talk about those in a minute, but there's ample evidence in the Bible about Christians remaining here on this earth during the time of what we would call troublous times, or a great tribulation, as the Bible terms it.
Yeah, quite a bit. And I think one of the things that we want to emphasize is that the Bible says there are things that have to happen before Christ returns. By the way, do you know there are 109 Old Testament scriptures that predicted things about Jesus Christ's first ministry and his coming? Like, he'd be born in Bethlehem, they would gamble for his clothes, no bones would be broke, a whole bunch of them. And I'm sure nobody noticed it until after Christ was crucified, and then they look back and said, wow, look at all those prophecies that were fulfilled when Jesus Christ came the first time.
Jesus even said, while he was talking to his disciples, when we'll get into that in a minute too, but when he was talking about the end time, he said, these be the days of vengeance, when all things that are written should be fulfilled. So he is actually himself saying that everything that is written is going to ultimately be fulfilled at some point in time.
And so anything that's not fulfilled in advance, that was prophecy to be fulfilled, has to occur before Christ comes back. So if you can find a lot of things that are not fulfilled, then Christ cannot come back tonight.
I agree wholeheartedly that the things that he mentioned, even to his disciples there on the Mount of Olives, when they asked him about the second coming and the end of the age, I don't think Jesus would have lied if all of these events hadn't been predicted by Jesus and were going to come about before his coming.
Let's just read, Ken, 1 Thessalonians 4:16 for a minute here. Actually, you could probably spend several hours discussing all the trumpets in Revelation before you get to the last trump that announces that Christ is coming back and the angels shout. And I wondered, what do you think an angelic shout in heaven would sound like? I think it would almost be like an alarm, like an ambulance alarm for the whole planet.
Well, Jesus said, I was going to save this scripture for later, but it seems like it fits here. He said, that every eye will see him. Every eye. And I mean, that's everybody that's on this earth is going to see his return. They're going to witness that coming, and not just those that are so-called raptured away or supposedly raptured away.
And see, all the trumpets, and they include a lot of bad things, are going to happen before you get to the last trump. Well, you could maybe argue maybe deception has happened already, but I would argue that a greater deception is yet to come. I'm not saying deception isn't big now, but propaganda and false deception will get even worse before Christ gets back. You wait and see. I think, and that's implied by the way it's written up. So all those things have not happened. Christ cannot come back tonight. Angels haven't shouted, and a lot of things haven't happened. It's just not going to happen. You could make an argument that if the whole world were to repent, some of the more vengeful things wouldn't happen. But do you really think the whole world is going to go to a marvelous repentance? Not with Satan, as clever as he is. I don't see it.
I mean, it would have to be. I was reading some literature that I got in the mail about great revivals that had come in the history of the United States and around the world, even over in Wales and other countries in England. But some of the writers that they quoted in this article were back from the 1800s. And, what fascinated me was the population of I believe the population of the whole United States was 30 million at that time. And it was only at what they considered a great revival was only 2 million people out of those 30 million, which was a high percentage given the fact that there were only 30 million people in the United States. But most of these people lived in rural farming communities. They were very lowly people. And now we live in a very industrialized, cities with almost 10 million people by themselves. And there's lots of distractions for a nation to repent. And it would be certainly surprising things I believe would have to get extremely bad for them to begin to look at, having a repentant heart.
And then when you look at major other parts of the world that don't even believe in any form of Christianity, this world is not going to go into any great. Maybe more will repent more or less depending on factors, but the vast majority is not going to repent. Christ will have to come in vengeance. I believe those prophecies they're about as certain as you can get. I really believe that.
Well, the church has taught for many years too about, the two basic scriptures that talk about the order of events, which is Matthew 24:29, and the audience probably is really familiar with these, that, that there would be a great tribulation, then the heavenly signs, and then finally the day of the Lord, which Paul is talking about here at the last trump. But even you mentioned the deception that would take place in the world. In the book of Revelation, it talks about this beast power, and everyone is aware of the Antichrist. They call it the Antichrist, or this beast power, this false religious system that is prophesied in the book of Revelation. But it even says in those scriptures there that it's going to be given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. So they're still here on this earth while he is performing his great masterful plan of trying to take possession of and control of the earth and to control the religions of the world as well.
Yeah, it's the truth. The truth be told, Rapture just doesn't have a strong leg to stand on when you really look at it carefully. But the people mean well, and everybody wants to be safe. I surely understand that. And I believe we can put together a reasonably comprehensive list of at least certain events that must happen before Christ shows up. So we cannot come tonight. Let's go to Revelation 11:1, please, Ken. Before Christ shows up. Revelation 11, chapter 1. Yeah, they're both there. I could read Revelation 11:1.
It'd be down the third scripture from there. It's Matthew 24 and then Revelation 11.
Oh, I'm sorry. I my eyes hit the wrong spot. I can't. I'm not as young as I look.
Hey, I'm okay. I thought I was losing it again.
I'm in John 10:34. Oh, what can I say? My eyes aren't as young as they look either.
Well, let's see. Something isn't working, right? Well, for some reason, something changed on me, so I'm just going to read it.
That's just Christ saying what we just said, that every prophecy has to be fulfilled. We're not going to, Christ's not going to come back and say, well, all those prophecies, we just junked it. We changed our mind. No, it's not going to happen. God does not have to change his mind.
Well, think about how disheartening it would be for people who believed wholeheartedly in the words of Jesus, and for him to change that, and or to say that he changed that when they, when they put all of their faith and trust in those scriptures that talk about the future and about the time of the end.
So actually, they asked Christ the question. His disciples were impressed with the temple, and apparently Herod had improved it right up until near the end period for that temple, and it was really in great, fabulous shape. And they asked, Christ in that environment, looking at the temple, they said, because the Olivet, anyway, it's like right across from the temple, so they get a good panoramic view of the temple from Mount Olive. So that it's called the Olivet prophecy. And his disciples asked Jesus, looking at the temple, what's going to be the sign of your coming and the end of this age? So they actually asked him the direct question, and his answer, we may not go into everything he answered until we get to the second part of this next week. So be sure and come back for the exciting conclusion next week. But this is one of the most spiritual and meaningful parts of the Bible, the Olivet prophecy. Ken, could you go ahead?
Go ahead. I was just going to make a comment because I've heard people say, well, that prophecy, that Olivet prophecy was meant for the disciples during their day. And when he was talking about the destruction of the temple, he was talking about what happened in 70 AD when Titus destroyed Jerusalem, came in and sacked Jerusalem. But if you look at the entirety of the prophecy, it goes on to talk about his second coming, the heavenly signs, the great tribulation, the heavenly signs, and then the day of the Lord. So you have to assign that prophecy to the time of the end. And that was their very question anyway, the end of the age as we know it.
So true. And even if there is duality in prophecy, what happened in 69, 70 AD might have been a model for what will happen in the end, a little bit. It doesn't change the meaning of what he said. He's talking about the end of the age.
Exactly. And let's see. We read Matthew 24 and verse 3. That's where it's at when they asked the question there. Exactly. There you go.
Can you put it on the screen and I can read it, or Stan can read it? Can they see it on the screen? Matthew 24:3.
I'll just read it here. And now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the?"
So he was certainly talking about the time of the end or the end of the age and his second coming, because the references both there in Matthew 24 and Luke 21 and Mark 13 all talk about different aspects of that day and his second coming. And, like it says in Luke that, look up, lift up your head, for your redemption draws nigh. I mean, he's talking about the actual salvation of his people and the rescuing them from this world at that time.
So true. So now we're going to get a beginning of key things that Christ wants his disciples, which includes all of us. Because you might remember at the last Passover, when Christ prays for the disciples, he says, I'm not just praying for you. I'm also praying for the people who will be converted by your words, which is us. We're converted by the words of the disciples. And so this is meant for all of us. And he starts listing some key things that we need to look out for. But let's go to Revelation 11:1, please, Ken. Now we're ready for it.
All right. Then I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and the angel stood saying, "Rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there." And then Matthew 24:15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let him understand.
We just did Daniel 2 weeks ago, so those who can go on Google and look at the Daniel's one, Christ both verifies the book of Daniel and shows that Daniel, because this is like 1,000 years after Daniel wrote it, that what Daniel said still applied. And remember, we said there was no second temple when Daniel wrote his warning about abominating it. People say, well, if there's no temple now, there wasn't a temple when Daniel wrote his either. So before Christ can come back, there are certain things that we can see have to exist. And I don't think there's any way you can get out of it. That temple is going to be turned into a temple, a pagan, ooey gooey, offensive temple to any Jew or Christian. That's going to happen again.
And
also,
oh, go ahead.
besides the temple, any comment that I moved too fast in that temple? I know we covered it before.
No, we covered it before, but I just wanted to make the point that, not only is it the temple going to be in existence, which it's not today, but that there will be sacrifices and oblations taking place, as we read back in Daniel when we went through that the sacrifices and the oblations by this beast power he will cause them to cease. So he will do away with these sacrifices and evidently will be reinstituted at some point in the future. So that temple has to be there, and it has to be, be conducting business as it did back in the day when there was a temple.
Here's an interesting point. There are some Jewish groups that claim they want to build, I guess, on the facing mountain, Mount of Olives. They want to put up an altar facing the holy site, just an altar, and start morning and afternoon sacrifices. They probably won't do that, but that's what they want to do. I don't think the government will allow them. But when the Jews first came back from exile, it's the opposite of what happened in the modern world, because they were scared. They were surrounded by hostile Samaritans and Arabs, and they wanted protection. The first thing they did was set up an altar and laid the foundation for a temple. Now, it took a while to get the temple and the walls and all that stuff built, but they started working on the temple before they started working on the total walls to fix the city of Jerusalem. They thought they had to have God's protection first. The interesting thing, the modern nation of Judah, when they, in 1967, 68, when they got the holy sites in Jerusalem all under their military control, everybody thought they would build a temple. But they allowed the Jordanians, there's a little Jordanian Islamic group that takes charge of it. They allowed them to maintain their control of the holy mountain and the El Aqsa Mosque. And they've been building up the nation of Israel, but not the temple. It's almost the opposite of what they did when they came back from captivity. In other words, does that make sense?
That's a very interesting point, Dr. Ricks. Well put. I never really thought of it that way, but you read in Ezra and Nehemiah their passion, for rebuilding the temple, and it says that when they saw those foundation being laid, some of those people just dropped to their knees and began to weep because they remember the former glory that maybe when they were a child, they may have been 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years old. When they went into captivity, they saw this enormous temple that was there at that time. And when they came back from captivity, it was a pile of rubble. Looked something like out of World War II, city over in Germany. And they were just distraught at the scene. But when they did lay the foundation of the temple, it meant a great deal to those people. And I believe the attitude was exactly the opposite, as you said. They they were really beseeching God, and they were there to listen to the law being read and as expounded by Ezra and of course in Nehemiah's day as well when they began to build the wall.
Yeah, they wanted God's protection first before they went to the military stuff of building the wall, and they got God's protection. So, Ezra and Nehemiah are great stories, but the modern day Jews, I'm not saying that they didn't have a tough way to go. They really did from 1947, 48. So I do understand it, and the 67 war. But it seems like their attitude is the exact opposite. It's build a nation. We'll worry about the temple and religious stuff later, if we ever get around to it.
Quite interesting. You mentioned Nehemiah. One of the things he did before he left to return to Jerusalem, was to not request any guards to go with them. He just said, we're going to go because I told the king God is going to protect us along the way. And that's exactly what he trusted in. Even before they left Babylon to return to Jerusalem, he just put it in God's hand, even though he had all the money and the gold and the silver that they had to go rebuild the temple and establish the religion once again. He just put it in God's hands, and you just don't see that kind of faith nowadays in the nation of Israel.
Not that America is a shining example of super spirituality either. I mean, in all fairness to the Jewish people, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so at some point, I do believe something will shock them, and they'll have to. And Netanyahu does have it on the bottom of his wish list to rebuild the third temple. But as I say, I think it's going to take a lot to pressure them to do it, don't you?
Yes, and we pondered that over the years, whether they found some relic or something that reinstituted a religious fervor or vigor in the Jewish population there in Israel. They have a lot of things to overcome in that nation, just like the United States does. But it's almost as if Satan has really used that as a tool, because the religious community of the world, especially, most specifically Christianity, looks to the Jewish people in Israel for guidance when it comes to religious matters. And they have sort of let go of the lead and allowed religion or Christianity to sort of go its own way. And here you have a nation that could bring about possibly a new revival in beseeching God for his protection for their own nation and their own people, but would reverberate around the world, and I believe even in Christianity as well.
I've been, well, we used to get it. We haven't had it lately, but the magazine where they do all the archaeology today and all the diggings. And so based on what they and the radio show I hear say, as the Jews have more access to East Jerusalem, they're buying up more and more of it, and they're digging around what's David's castle and throne. They're finding more and more evidence to support the Bible. Iron plaques that wouldn't have decayed over time, all kinds of things. And I think GTA said this. I believe he said it. If they were to happen to discover in the Holy Mountain buried the dome underneath there somewhere, the Ark of the Covenant in reasonably good shape, and maybe even the Ten Commandment carvings inside, they could maybe scan it, that would be a political hot football, because the Muslim world, especially the PLO, their position is, we were here first. There was never a Jewish temple here. We don't want to believe it, and we refuse to believe it. And if you bring it up, we'll blow something up. I mean, wouldn't that be almost like a lightning rod?
I believe it would not only be that, but it would be the relic of all relics. It would be the archaeological find of history, I believe, because of its significance.
Didn't they just restore the pool where Christ, put the mud, I forget the verse, but cured that blind man? They uncovered it a while ago, but they kind of restored it, didn't they? Opened it up for people.
I saw some discussion of it. I don't understand it, but one of those pools that and the steps that go down to it or something, they've they've uncovered it, and they've uncovered some stuff about was it Pilate and some other stuff from the last couple of years of Christ. They found them in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
More history is being
Yeah,
dug
quite a
up.
bit more actually in recent years.
So my point is, at some point, this could happen. It will be incendiary, and you know the PLO is going to just blow a cork.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point, Dr. Ricks. Satan would love, just like he's doing everything else, to try to put down the story, to bury the story, to bury the idea. But I don't know how in the world, unless they claim that it was an invention of the Jewish people, to discount or discredit the story if that were actually found. I don't know how they could hide or bury that story. I mean, they got a lot of power in the media to do it, but it would be amazing to see them try to bury that story.
By the way, not that this it could be just somebody fundraising. We got a letter today from some fundraiser, Jewish Christian organization. They claim the current government in D.C. they've already dropped some sanctions against Iran. They have a lot more money to do mischief. And Iran, in spite of the fact that they're about to come into a nuclear weapon, our government seems to be more inclined to help them than to help Israel. I mean, that's what they're saying.
Yeah.
And I think, well, of course, politically, that wouldn't be smart for them to admit it. But I kind of have a feeling they're right.
Well, that started with Obama. He doesn't think it's fair that Israel has nuclear weapons and the Muslim world does not. I mean, that by his logic, everybody should have. If one side's going to have it, the other side should have it. He's been helping them get it since he was president.
See, now I'm going to jump out on another speculative limb, and this is quite a speculative limb, but anything's possible. You'd have to have a very pro-Israeli American president if they decide to build the temple, because America gives them a lot of weapons and foreign aid and probably other support that we're not even fully aware of. And of all the politicians I know of, the only one whose grandkids are Jewish and who would not be afraid to buck the Arab world and say, I don't care what you think. If they want to build a third temple, I'll back them. You know who that president is, don't you? Mm-hmm. Therefore, you never know. But then it might not, anything that I say, of course, may not be true. Maybe someone else like DeSantis will also have the same feelings, and he'll be a future president. But most politicians, they don't want to buck the Arab world. They wouldn't move our capital. They wouldn't do anything. And a third temple, are you kidding me? They would, you got to freeze that project. No way we're going to allow that to go through. But we shall see. And it could be like 15, 20 years away. I can see that. Timing is a tough thing. But the one thing I learned from the fall of the Soviet Union, they were in power for most of the 20th century. Who would have thought within about 3 months they collapsed? Would you have believed it would happen that fast?
No one would have believed it if you'd have told them.
Things can change fast. I'm not saying they will change fast, but they could change fast.
Yes, they could. Certainly could.
Let's see. Let's read Revelation 11:3, please,
All right,
Ken.
I think I fixed my audio issue. Hey. Nope. There we go. It's there. All right. And I will give power to my 2 witnesses, and if anyone wants to harm them, fire proceeds. And if anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this manner.
So, by the way, I don't think they're human flamethrower. I think it's just like Elijah. When they came to arrest him, he said, if I'm a prophet of God, let fire come down from heaven and burn you. Fire came down from heaven and burned that platoon of soldiers up. I think it'll be like that. But regardless, they'll have that kind of power. So here's what we can see must happen before Christ comes back. Just in the few verses we've read. One, you have to have a series of trumpets of God. We haven't heard any trumpets sounding. Second, you have to have a third temple in Jerusalem on the holy site. And it's got to be an impressive temple. Can't be some tiny little synagogue off somewhere. I don't think the beast would care to be crowned there. It's got to be an impressive. Third, the desecration of said temple. And fourth, evangelism of two powerful, unstoppable witnesses of God. And there's none of that's in place tonight, so Christ cannot come tonight.
One of the things I might add too, if you read anything in religious literature having to do with the time of the end, it's the best way to get completely confused, because it talks about the Great Tribulation period. Most of them believe in a Great Tribulation period. Many of them believe in the rapture. Some believe that the Great Tribulation period is going to last 7 years. Some say 3.5 years. And as we discussed earlier, some people believe in what is called the pre-tribulation period, the rapture of the church, and even the salvation of the church during the tribulation or post-tribulation. There's all kinds of theories out there. But when you look at the scriptures that talk about the two witnesses, it tells us that they're going to preach for 42 months. It's basically 3.5 years, 42 months, and the Bible talks about 1,260 days, time, and half a time. All the references that talk about this period of time are 3.5 years. So I don't understand how there is so much confusion about it. Even in the book of Daniel, it says that it's for a time and a half. All of the references, and there's 4 or 5 different ones, talk about 3.5 year period when this beast power will reign. It will be the time when this the nation of Israel will be put down and out and perhaps in captivity. And it'll be the time when these two witnesses will be giving their final testimony. I think one of the real poignant things that came to my mind about this subject tonight, one of the prime examples that God gave all of us to look at, was what happened when he brought the nation of Israel out of the land of Egypt. It is like an eternal testimony. He didn't grab them up and then destroy Egypt. He let Israel witness all of these plagues that came upon the nation of Egypt. And it was by the blood that they put on the doorpost and the lintels that brought them salvation and rescued them from death when these plagues were. And they came, as it were, out of tribulation, which is exactly what we read in the book of Revelation, that there are those that are standing there in that day. They have white robes, and they're called the innumerable multitude. And it says they came out of tribulation. They went through the tribulation period. And I think that story of the Exodus is an absolute example that God can protect you before, during, and after a period of great trouble and tribulation and plagues that could descend upon the earth.
Yeah, the fact that he would pull people off the earth, there's no evidence of him doing that in the past. It's not something he does. So why all of a sudden at the end of the age would he bail out a bunch of people that he's never done before, when the horrible things have happened throughout the entire history of the earth? But this group, yeah, you get a pass. It makes no sense.
Well, if you look at it, one of the statements that came to my mind was it says, "Only with your eye will you see the destruction of the wicked." It's like they're going to witness God's wrath being poured out upon the wicked, and they're not swept away to some place of up in heaven away and not see the destruction of the earth, or the destruction of the wicked, I should say.
One thing occurred to me: even if you're in places of safety, I think you'll witness to, and probably in more ways than one, the bad things happening on earth. You won't be so isolated. You won't be, just like you said, they might have been in Goshen during the plagues, but they were aware of the plagues. They saw
Yeah, but
it.
they weren't taken anywhere. They were just at home.
Exactly.
They were at home.
Yeah, they were aware of the plagues
No
in Egypt.
problem with us being at home.
Yeah.
What
Wherever
more?
we're safe at, well, two things. Wherever we're safe at, we'll still be seeing the plagues around us. And secondly, like GTA said, very well said, we Christians are not the ones that are martyred. If you're a heroic martyr, that means you're a great Christian, a hero. It means you're the strong one that Christ's Spirit will speak through when you go before governors, etc., etc. We Christians are the ones who fall away and get sucked in by the world and deceived by the beast. By the way, do you know there are some churches that teach that America is the beast?
Yep, I've seen that. It's complete corruption of no understanding of who Israel is. Maybe even who modern day Israel is, the nation of Israel. That the 12 tribes, where they ended up in the earth, and that's a whole different subject of its own.
Oh, well, you can get, by the way, on the icgarea4.com. Well, you can get the full article and other articles. But I want to just read real quickly the origins of the rapture doctrine. There was a pastor in Ireland, and he had these emotional healing services, Mr. Darby, and a teenage girl had a vision during one of these sessions, and that's where she came up with the idea of the rapture. The good people would go up to heaven, and all the evil people would stay behind and suffer, the ones not in their church. He came to America in 1859 to 1877 with a bunch of evangelistic campaigns, and for some reason America really loved the rapture doctrine much more than Europe. And I think some theologians have kind of cleaned it up a little bit, but that's where it came from. In the long history of Christianity, the rapture never existed.
It's a very modern doctrine in the history of the church, along with a lot of other doctrines in modern Christianity.
1800s?
It's very modern.
1800s or 1800s?
Yeah, late 1800s. Late 1800s.
A girl. It was a girl of a vision. A girl had a vision, and that's how this whole thing started. So let's base a whole doctrine on this.
On a 15-year-old girl.
This young girl has this vision. Yeah, let's go with this. Well, it's escapism and it feels good, and they can cite like 50 verses to back it up. It's insane. I mean, the verses mean nothing close to what but they got 50 verses. They'll tell you, hey, this is the rapture.
By the way, the one that they say gives them the most hope. Let's look at it. 1 Thessalonians 4:17. This is the one that they kind of
the first one we read is one of their main ones. The very first verse we read earlier, but then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and thus we shall always be with the Lord.
Yeah. By the way, they look at the words "caught up" and try to say, well, in Latin, that could be considered the word raptus. But of course, the New Testament was written in Greek and not Latin. But the other problem with it is they're caught up together. It's the saints arising, and as Christ comes to earth, we're all meeting together. It's not like he's rapturing us up. We're meeting together with Christ in his return. Let's go to 1 Corinthians 15:51. Timing of that trumpet when Christ comes back.
Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, dead will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed.
Yeah, the last trump. And we don't get raptured, we get changed from physical to spiritual. By the way, one of the questions we thought might be worth asking is, if at some point in the future the world looks troubled and there are all kinds of problems, you think that will push people to have greater and greater faith in the rapture?
I think it possibly would, because it means that I get out of here and I don't have to go through all of these troubles. The point that I would make is those two scriptures that we just read, 1 Thessalonians, the 4th chapter, verse 17, and 1 Corinthians 15, 50 to 51 and 52. It's talking about the person that believes in the rapture theory believes that he's talking about saints that are caught up and they're on their way to heaven with Jesus Christ. They're going to heaven. They're caught up. But the premise or the reason that Paul wrote both of those scriptures had to do with the resurrection, not with any kind of a rapture theory. His reason for writing both of those scriptures was to address the fact that there were those who had died and were asleep. Paul said, if there is no resurrection of the dead, our preaching is in vain. So why would Paul use these scriptures in referring to people who had died? Because he said, we shall not all sleep. He was talking about, oh, by the way, I found out too that the word cemetery, you know what the word cemetery means? The word cemetery actually means a sleeping place. That's the actual meaning of the term.
Interesting.
But Paul was referring to those that had died. So if there is a rapture, would it not be the rapture of those that are alive on the earth and not the dead? I mean, it doesn't make sense to me that you would have a rapture of those that are on the earth and you're going to save them from what's about to happen on the earth, all the bad things that are going to happen. And yet Paul is actually mainly referring to those that are dead, that are asleep. And he includes those that are alive in that statement. Then we which are alive will be caught up together with the Lord. And the other point that I wanted to make is that they're not being raptured up to heaven. We know in the Church of God, if you read what it tells us, that Jesus said, I will come again. It tells us in Zechariah the 14th chapter, his feet will stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives. And it says he's coming with clouds and every eye will see him. He's actually on his way down to this earth. It says he will make us kings and priests and we shall reign on the earth. So yes, they will meet the Lord in the air, but as he descends down to this earth, he's not ascending like some people will propose that like the first time he ascended up to heaven. He's certainly not doing that. He's coming back here to this earth.
And I presume as we meet him in the air, we circle and we all land in Mount Zion in Jerusalem.
I think that seems to be what it indicates, that we'll be standing there. Where else would we be standing than the place that he, in the book of Acts, it says, why do you men of Galilee stand gazing? This same Jesus is coming in like manner as you've seen him go. He's going to come right back down to this very same place.
And I know there are those who say, well, he's going to make a close entry to earth, kind of like a close one, then swoop, a U-turn, and swoop back to heaven. But the truth is, Stan, you made a good point. They don't look at the context. They look at the context of all those verses. It's just the opposite. And you might add, if the context is the resurrection, why put people that are in heaven enjoying the harp music and having fun where everybody's suffering? Why put them back in the cold, dank ground to be resurrected when they've been up in heaven for 7 years? You see what I mean, don't you?
Yeah. I love the scripture that the archangel, now if you can't believe an archangel, that told Mary, you're going to call your new child, his name is going to be Jesus or Joshua. And it says he's going to be great and he's going to inherit the throne of his father David. Boy, that scripture there is just, you have to ask, where's the throne of David? Where was it? It was here on this earth. And he's going to be the logical successor to that throne, and it's going to be here on this earth. And of course, the book of Revelation talks about him ruling and reigning with a rod of iron, and all nations are going to come to Jerusalem at the Feast of Tabernacles, and the law is going to go forth out of Zion, and all those many scriptures.
Father, if you think about geography, what's the central location in the whole world? It's really the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
Because from the Middle East, you can go into Europe, you can go into Africa, or you can go into Asia. I mean, if you think about it, I realize the New World, but the New World is kind of smaller population later.
Yeah.
But for the heart of the world, most people are in Europe, Asia, or Africa. Well, India's in Asia too, but just on the other side of the Middle East is, well, depends how you define it as Iran and then India, and you know what I'm saying. And then, so the point I'm getting at is, it is the center of the earth, and that's where the headquarters of the world is going to be, Jerusalem.
The cradle of civilization, it really is. I mean, all roads don't leave Rome. The roads lead out of the Middle East and in Jerusalem and Israel there. All the history, the ancient history there of the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Egyptians are all right there in that central area.
And if you take a course in ancient history and archaeology, they all admit everything starts from the Crescent Valley in the Middle East. The Fertile Crescent. I meant the Fertile Crescent. Yeah.
Yes.
The Fertile Crescent in the Middle East. And Jerusalem is probably the most important sacred city by far in the world. Not because of its material value, because you could say a city like Houston has more material value than Jerusalem, far and away, but Jerusalem is more important.
Absolutely. You think about it, it's a strategic crossroads there in that area. But, like you said, if you talk about natural resources or oil and gas, I mean, Israel is not abundant in all of those things, but it is the crossroads of, the Catholics, the Christians, the Muslims, and the Jews.
Yeah.
For the religious benefit, I guess.
Yeah, it is it's the key city. And when they rebuild that temple, it will become the most important building for a few years, at least in the world. So much so that the beast will want to have himself crowned as God in that temple. It can't be some Joe Schmo little halfway built little synagogue somewhere. That's not going to get it. So we will see what happens, but a lot has to happen. And of course, the two witnesses. By the way, I would argue, though this is wishful thinking, I guess, but unless the end is a long way off and anything is possible, the devil is grooming several men to play the role of the beast and the false prophet. Wouldn't you guess that?
If it is but a short time off, that person would have to be alive and well and up in their 30s or 40s possibly by now, and could be. It's interesting that the Pope, the former Pope that died, Ratzinger, is in the news, and here we have another Pope that is not in very good health, and we could see a change in that institution, rather quickly in the future as well.
And if you were to go back into the 20s and 30s, I would argue that the devil was grooming Mussolini, Hitler, and maybe a few other supporting actors like Franco in Spain. He was grooming them for what he was going to do.
Yeah.
In the 40s. Nobody would have guessed it. In the slums of Vienna, this crazy artist, the devil was grooming him with hatred and whatever. Maybe Mussolini's story is a little different. But didn't Mussolini murder his first person at age 16, I believe? I may get the age details, but something like that. Can you see he was grooming the people he was going to use?
Well, we made the point, I believe it was last week or the week before, that he picked someone who was a weak character, someone who was, brilliant, but also, had a huge inferiority complex, had sexual issues of his own, but we remember too that we talked about how Satan told Jesus, I will give you all the kingdoms of the earth if you will bow down and worship me. And that's exactly what he did to those men. He he offered them the rule of the world, basically, if they would only, do his bidding. And they certainly gave in to that.
It certainly looks, and so he's probably grooming some people now. I'd almost get in trouble by mentioning the name of somebody I'm suspicious of, 2 or 3 people in Europe. But who knows? You never can tell. Sometimes people that you think are wonderful, because the media hasn't either discovered or shown you their real side yet.
One of the television programs, if you've ever watched Glenn Beck, he talked about going to Rome and visiting the Vatican and going into St. Peter's Basilica. And one of the things that he mentioned, he was at a large gathering in a great ballroom, and there were all of these cardinals from all over the world, and they were all great guys, friendly, easygoing. You could tell they were humble guys. They were, for most of them, from the poorer countries of the world. And he said, you can look and talk to somebody. We have this concept about cardinals all over the world because of our idea about the Roman Catholic Church and what it might mean in prophecy. But for the most part, these guys are sincere. They're humble guys. They're lowly. They're ascetic sort of lifestyle. And it tends to lead them to be a humble, caring. And he said you could see that sort of caring, loving personality in these. But in comes this guy walking in. And with him is the mayor of Rome and the finance minister. And one of the cardinals actually told Glenn Beck, that guy is one of the problems. He said there's a war going on within the Vatican. And it is it's sort of good versus evil. And it makes you wonder if that person, and Glenn Beck wouldn't mention his name, but he said, obviously he had a lot more superiority and seniority over all of these lesser cardinals. Makes you wonder if that wouldn't be someone that would be being groomed for a position of high authority in a religious, world.
Well, I just thought something terrible. You don't think Satan is grooming people to help bring America down?
Yeah, they're standing in D.C.
Wow.
I think we're on vote 14 now.
Yes. Jesus encourages us to be cautious. So why does he encourage us to be cautious? I think the big thing is, actually the first thing he says is deception. And like we said I think a week before last, the world's propaganda machine is going to all kick in. Like right now, it's not totally unified. But if ever it gets completely unified, the world's propaganda machine, think of how much they can brainwash all of us.
Well, if you control the information, if you control everything that is being said over the airwaves, we're still sort of fortunate that we have some opinions or some ideas or some thoughts or some news reporting from the other side that we're allowed to see and listen to, witness. But what happens if they take complete control of every form of media, every form of news, every device that we have, and the whole world can only see their side of an argument? And we're going to be in deep trouble if we're not watching, and that world deception will be rampant.
We're 95% there now. Maybe
social media is
underestimating.
scary.
Maybe 99% there. It's such.
Well, if you consider places like China, where a quarter of the population of the earth is already under that kind of rule, and places like North Korea and other hugely populated nations, you're probably, it might be more than that.
Most of this country is. Even Fox is. I don't watch them because they're mostly just about as bad as CNN and the rest of them, with a couple of exceptions. And it's all,
Well,
every news outlet is like that.
They have to walk they have to dance to the tune, or they don't get to go to the dance, because if they completely take the position of a far right wing media source, then they're going to get blackballed, to some degree, or to a great degree.
You don't get paid. The people pull their advertising. Coke,
Exactly.
Pepsi, Ford, Chevy, Moderna, none of them will advertise with you if you're not towing the line. So that's exactly what they're running the show, man.
Well, if you consider that our country is divided pretty much down the middle, 50-50 between right and left, and I don't believe that that's the case. They want to make us believe that that's what's happening. But even if you did believe that, that's still only 150 million people, and you compare that to the population of the earth that are under evil regimes, and it's being influenced by their own media and told what to do, where to do, and as such, then it's a very small percentage.
I mean, South America now, Brazil's done. I mean, they've got much left fight in them. Venezuela, now most of Europe. I mean, they're shutting down fun. I mean, the whole thing we're living this right now. We got to realize that how thin of a margin of actual truth we get is just tiny, and you still got to pick at it to dig into it.
I want to congratulate you, Ken, on getting us on Rumble. Rumble may not be as colorful as YouTube, but Rumble's more open to varying points of view.
Yeah.
And they won't censor you like YouTube. I heard some more stories. I can't remember the details of key people last few years that have been censored on YouTube. You'd be surprised. Because what social media wants to create is the atmosphere that they have total truth. They know science. Everybody agrees that it's whatever they say it is, like with the vaccine. And obviously, you create a false consensus when social media cuts down all the dissenting views. And that's the problem. So I'm glad, Ken, you got us on Rumble. It'd be nice if the church could get more of our stuff on Rumble as well as YouTube. Get them on both. Because I want to see the alternative, the ones that are more open, get more traffic.
I was just thinking here too about the control of the media and the news networks and all of the propaganda that is out there. How the two witnesses will ever make any headway in getting their message out, but it tells us they're going to preach that final message to the whole world, and they're going to be a witness to all the nations of the earth. It's got to be something so absolutely under the scales and under the skin of those nations that they bring about such a reform or havoc, both, because it says that they could tell, they could say that it's not going to rain on the earth and it won't rain, that they won't be looked upon as someone who's trying to preach the good news or the gospel message or warning about the return of Christ. They'll be looked upon as sort of an enemy causing all the havoc upon the earth. And that's only way I can understand that their message will go out to some degree is because of their condemnation of those two witnesses.
It'll be something to watch. It'll be interesting to watch how they do it. It'll be very interesting. Ken, did we read Matthew 24:41 yet? Okay.
2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into.
Yeah, this is the conundrum for believers, and we're going to discuss it next week, hopefully, and with a lot more expansion on it. On one hand, Christ says, watch the prophetic events and watch my coming getting closer. And on the other hand, he says it's going to come as a thief in the night and catch the whole world off guard and asleep. And those two things do not have to be contradictory, just a matter of how we understand them. We'll talk about that next week. But I did think the lesson that he gives, I know we're about out of time, but I want to read verse 44, and then we can all discuss the lesson that Jesus is giving his disciples.
Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming in an hour you do not expect. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his master made ruler over his household, to give them food in due season? Blessed is that servant whom his master, when he comes, will find so doing.
And that is the big question, right?
That story or that scenario that Jesus is putting forth there is actually a parable about a master who goes away and returns to see what these servants are doing. People actually don't take that literal enough that that's exactly what Jesus was talking about, that he was going to return. He was going to look and see what these servants were doing when he returned. But a little teaser for next week, I wanted to mention the scripture where in the book of Revelation, he says, during the time when this beast power is holding sway, when religious deception is all over the world, the warning to God's people, and this is, to me, I think, really solidifies the fact that Christians, that saints, are still here on this earth during the time of the Great Tribulation and all the deception that's going on. He says to them, come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of her sins, that you receive not of her plagues. They're there right in the thick of it, and they're being protected. And he's telling them over and over again in a couple different places, he says, this is the patience of the saints, that you keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. So they're right there in it. He's encouraging them. He's protecting them. And here he's telling them, I'm going to return, and you need to be aware and watching for that time.
Yeah. And we got to stay ready. I was thinking, looking at the world, just looking at prophecy in the world, the guy was joking this morning. It might have been Glenn Beck, but somebody was saying, oh, the left-wing media said the whole world is upset because the American lower house is having a very democratic debate over who the next speaker is going to be. He says, no, they're not. He said, the Chinese government is worried about riots and collapses in their health system because of COVID. They could care less about, well, anyway, who's going to be American speaker, probably. Iran is having all kinds of riots, mostly younger people, against the theocracy. Brazil's having riots based on people believing the election was stolen and their Supreme Court helped. Interesting parallel there, isn't it? But, and there's some other problems in France and other places. Is it possible, when you look at all these rioting scenes, is it possible that something big is going to fall?
Well, I mean, one of the biggest things, in my opinion, that I believe is we're on the very brink of would be the collapse of the economy around the world. I mean, we're such in debt right now as a nation, and that you talk about something that could domino around the world, the collapse of the economy worldwide, or whether we go to a digital economy as a result of the collapse of the one we have now, whether the dollar is going to continue to be the world's, trade, monetary exchange. It's certainly something of that magnitude really could bring about things very rapidly in the world to make changes or to try to bring about peace and unity once again in these nations that are going to be completely upside down.
Oh, Stan, since you're in the oil industry, you might heard about this, and I think I saw this yesterday on YouTube. You know, the Chinese we're trying to get Saudi Arabia, which doesn't like our administration, to not trade in petrodollars, but to trade in the yuan, the Chinese basket currency, and buy and sell oil there, and it looked like they were going to do it, and the oil might stop being the world's reserve currency. But then yesterday, it looked like Saudi Arabia kind of backed off, as if they're a little afraid of monetary collapse or confusion, or they say we're going to work with both sides. I'm not sure what that means, but it's like they're backing away from a cliff or something, or a big change. You hear anything about that?
Well, I know what's happening in the oil industry right now. You know, we've all been paying $5 a gallon for gasoline, and the price of natural gas has been through the roof for the first time in about 10 years. But this week, the price of oil fell to $77 a barrel, and the price of natural gas, which was almost, I think it got up to almost $10, is down to, I'm talking about natural gas now, was down to $3.80 this morning. So something is happening to the price, whether it's because of the interest rates are climbing and they're trying to hold back the inflation that is happening, and it's affecting the economy in ways that are slowing down industry, or slowing down those investors that wanted to invest to keep the economy moving along, and they're backing away. Maybe that's a result. Maybe that is the reason why they backed away, because it's not as strong as it was, 6 months or a year ago.
Volume's down.
Very possible.
Volume's down. We had, with the exception of the bad week around a couple of weeks ago where we had that brutally cold weather, we've had a fairly mild winter. We haven't had any snow to speak of.
Well,
we haven't had any cold, other than for about a 4 or 5 day period that was below normal. I mean, we've had a mild winter, and that drives, that lowers volume. So when volume goes down, supply goes up and prices drop.
Ken, is it possible people have learned to drive less?
Well, a lot of people are working from home, and people are driving less. We see volume down. Volume is down a fair percentage.
Also, China's economy is hurting, and they're the number one buyer of oil globally. If China's economy continues to go down, that's good in a way. Oil prices will go down, but also, won't that drive the world into a global recession?
It already is in a recession. You get $6 a carton for eggs. That's recession, man.
Yeah, I heard somebody scream today, but they said it was $5 something a gallon. A carton, and they were mad about it.
It's like $5-6 a carton for eggs, man. And my chickens slowed down. I got to get them pumping again. They slowed down. I got a light burning in there to get them off of that molting, man. I got to get them back laying.
Well, all I can say is it could be, Stan, that maybe the world is worried about a global something going. They could fall apart, and then again, things could hold up and just kind of slough along, and maybe be down a little bit, but just slough along, and we kind of get through it. It could go either way, right?
I think so. I felt this. I felt this way 25 years ago. I thought that, we would see a continual downward spiral of the economy, and we would fall down. And then between that time and now, we've seen the stock market reach its highest levels in the history of the stock market. 36,000. Can you believe it? Or 39, I think it was at the highest point at one time. When I saw that, I thought, man, this thing can turn around. It really can. The economy can turn around. It can be robust. It can be strong. During the Trump years, we saw some of the best economy we had in literally decades. And now here we are 2 years later, and we're suffering one of the worst catastrophes, I believe, that we've seen in our debt structure and the things that are going on in our world. So, it could it could go either way, but I think we still have to watch the major indices, like the economy and the powers that are in the world, the nations of the world, and how they are responding and how they set policy against what we're trying to do here in the United States.
The world leaders the people running the show want to see the United States like a third world nation. And that's everything they're doing it. It's happening.
Well, maybe not a third world nation, but someone on equal scale as the rest of the world. And maybe you could call that a third world nation, but they want the United States to have one vote along with the others.
Yeah, America's still the number one power in the world. And the guy from Saudi Arabia claimed that America still has the biggest economy, bigger than China.
Yeah.
Now, they said last year China was the biggest. Maybe China has contracted enough that they're not the biggest anymore.
It's hard to believe that the United States is still the biggest economy in the world. Now, that just,
it's hard to believe, isn't it?
When you see what has happened to the manufacturing in the world, the jobs that have gone overseas for the last 30 years in America. I want to tell you guys this story. I was out working on a gas well this week, day before yesterday. It was a poison gas well. We have to be real careful out there working in this stuff. And we had the guys run a piece of 1-inch pipe up high and over to a vessel. I saw some writing on it. I looked over there and it said Ukraine on the side of that 1-inch pipe. We have a pipe manufacturing facility up here in Lone Star, Texas, which is about 40 miles from my house. We can make pipe in Ukraine, ship it all the way over here to the United States and use it in the oil and gas industry. And we can't make it 40 miles down the road. Something is desperately wrong with that.
Here's a story I heard here in Missouri. They claim that they can buy lumber in Missouri, take it to China, do whatever they do to it, and bring it back, and it'll be the floors of trucks. And they can do it cheaper that way than taking the same American wood and having it manufactured in America. The Chinese must be cheating. How can they ship it over there and back and make it cheaper than they can make it here?
Garbage to treat the wood. That's what they're doing. You probably don't want to know what they're using to treat the wood.
You know that China is also utilizing all of the green rules and regulations that's being imposed upon the United States as well.
Just want to remind you, it's like 20
all
after.
Rules. Oh, yeah, I guess we better shut it down.
We seem to be droning on.
But thank you, gentlemen, for an exciting program. And next week, I hope we can make it even more so.
I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their Sabbath. And good night. And we hope to see you again here next week.
Good night, everybody.
We're happy you could make it, and so glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.